All right. Welcome, Imhotep Institute Charter and Dr. Darren Franklin. Thank you all so much for being here. Darren, we're honored to have you on with us to speak with our students and mentor them. Can you go ahead and tell us in 1 to 2 sentences what you guys are doing at DG Franklin Consulting and what your role is as CEO?
Thank you for having me, Vanessa and Eileen. So I started my consultancy in October after a over 3 decade career with the federal government. And it's based on two things. One is consulting with businesses around strategy, around what we call business transformation. And also I'm developing a leadership program based on my research on resilience. That's number one. Number two is my coaching program that I'm just starting up, and I'm working towards international certification on that. There's this whole international certification body called International Coaching Federation. And that is basically to walk folks through life who wish to figure out how to partner with folks so that they have some level of accountability. So basically coaching people in a formal way. I've been doing that for so many years, but this is a formal route to do that. And then also for executives, for business leaders, and just for anybody who's looking for someone to help them both surface their goals, but also walk through the execution of what they say they want to do via their goals. So that's my consultancy.
Okay. So resilience and accountability are kind of those guiding pillars in your work.
Yeah, mostly resilience. And, I study resilience as a part of my doctorate because it was a personal interest to me. It's been a core tenet in my entire life. And so, one of my best professors told me when I entered the program was to study something that you're interested in because that way, you'll be passionate about it. So, that's how I
Definitely.
ended up studying resilience.
Yeah, creating a lifelong career out of it too.
Yeah.
So let's get to know you a little bit more individually. Tell us, where did you grow up and where are you living now?
Sure. So I was born in Washington, D.C. It used to be called Chocolate City, and I actually have a book around here somewhere about the history of Chocolate City. It's kind of vanilla chocolate now, but it used to be brown milk chocolate, um, dark chocolate actually. My mother had me with my dad, and they weren't married at the time. So once I was born, my dad actually was drafted into the army and went to Vietnam. They had plans to marry before he went. He went to Vietnam and then he came back back a different person. What we did not know, what my mother did not know, and even he did not know about himself because it wasn't talked about a lot, was that he had PTSD, post traumatic syndrome, and
Stress
stress
disorder.
disorder. I'm sorry. I'm actually thinking about post-traumatic slave syndrome, but that's a whole other subject. But it's PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Thank you, Vanessa. And so they ended up not getting married. And so, we lived in DC for about 6 years. My mom met the man who raised me, who I call my dad. So we lived in DC for several more years after they married. When I think I said six, but at seven, because my parents had this really novel idea to move us back to where my mom was from, and that was in rural Virginia on a farm in a house that my maternal grandfather had actually built for my mom and her brothers and her mom. And so at the age of 12, we moved from the city to the country, totally different from me as a city boy, had to make new friends, learn all different type of language, even though it was still English. It's a cultural immersion. And I hated it, but I ended up loving it later on in life. After I graduated high school, great, great student. I came back up here to go to college. A couple years into college, I became a dad. And so I dropped out of college. I started working to raise my kids, and then went back to college later on as an adult and finished my bachelor, got my master's, and then my doctorate. So that's me. Right now, I live in Charles County. So I've come full circle, basically.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like resiliency was a big part of your childhood as well. So you've been able to learn from that, grow from that, and now share all that within your research and now your coaching and everything else you're sharing with your community and businesses surrounding you. So that's beautiful, that full circle story. I'll just ask you one more question about growing up, and then I'm going to turn it over to our students. So they'll have some tough questions for you. But tell us in middle school and high school, what was keeping you busy? Were you big into sports, academia, or what were you gravitating towards?
Thank you for that question. So, I left this part of the story out. My dad and my mom were ministers. They were pastors. So I spent a lot of time in church, much to my dismay. All day Sunday, I would study on Tuesdays, choir rehearsal on Thursdays, revivals, summer Bible school, Bible camp, all of it. So a lot of time in church, but also all of my siblings, there's 5 of us, were very musical. And so we all sang and or played instruments. So I spent a lot of time playing instruments, a lot of time like informal sports around the neighborhood. Football was one of my favorites. So that was me. I also was a nerd. I read a lot, read lots of books, lots of science fiction, biographies. And a part of the reason why probably I ended up at Peace Corps was because I was always dreaming of, my world being larger than it was. One of the stories that my mom has, um, about me when I was a child is that every time we went somewhere, particularly in the store, when we entered the store, they would go one way and then I would go another because I wanted to explore and see what was going on. And they always ended up having to call me on the speakerphone in the store to find me. So I used to always get in trouble. But I've always been an explorer, and that's been a core tenet of my life. So
So, doing a lot of research in your academic career now that allows you that opportunity to continue to explore something that you had early on and something that's guiding your career and pursuits today. Is that correct?
yeah, I've always been interested in people. Biggest thing I think I would say about me is that I've always wanted to understand the why behind the what, why people show up like they do in the world. For instance, if we're talking about United States, I always wondered when I was a child how Black people ended up in California. And then I started reading and I started learning about the Great Migration, and things like that. And so for me, always been interested in people. And now, even in my career, I've always been able to invest in people and to be of service to people. And even, I mean, that's how I met Eileen actually by serving. In our local church and being a worship leader and really and teaching a leadership development course there over several years. So my interest, I always told my parents I was never going to be a public preacher. And so I think I found a way to be of service and or to minister to people in a different way, just out from the pulpit. That's
Okay.
why I'm at me.
That's beautiful. Yeah. It's interesting too, like some of the things you thought you didn't like or tried to push away early on found their way back into your heart and kind of are guiding you now. So that's really cool to see. Terrell, what's your first question for Dr. Franklin?
My first question is how do you see coaching and counseling evolving with the uprising of AI?
That is a great question. So, just at the outset, coaching and counseling are two different disciplines. So, my wife is going into more of that field. She's actually back in school now. But in terms of coaching, and that's a very timely question, Terrell, because I'm actually in the process of extending my research. What I've learned so far is that a lot of entities and organizations are leaning so much into the technology aspect that they're not paying attention to the people aspect enough attention, right? So what we know is that right now, a lot of people, if you look at the corporate world, a lot of folks are having AI anxiety, but not just in the corporate world, in academia, everywhere, because everybody's trying to get up to speed as soon as possible. But if you think about businesses, a lot of people working in businesses now where the organizations are incorporating AI, their number one anxiety is that they're scared they're going to lose their job to AI. And in some instances, it's going to happen. And then also, they're scared because they don't know how to use it. They don't know how to do prompts. They don't know how to use it to be more productive. And so what we're seeing is that a lot of companies like Google, I was actually on my phone yesterday and Google sent me an email saying they had free AI training. And we know why they're offering it for free because they want the information to help train their language models. And so that's kind of how I see some of what's happening now. Again, a lot of organizations are focusing more on the technology, but they also need to upskill their employees so that they help relieve some of that anxiety so that they can adapt to being partners with AI versus being scared of AI. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's kind of the thought of how do we integrate this, but keep people at the forefront, knowing that people are necessary. It makes sense that people are nervous about this and losing their careers. And as you said, some will, but keeping people at the forefront, having making sure that you know that they're the ones running the technology is a key and something that we need to focus on.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that I've found as I look at this again, Terrell, is and Vanessa, is really folks being adaptable. And that's something you always are going to have to figure out how to do, both in school, now in college, but also in your career, is when things change, how can I use the resources that I have both within myself and that are available to me externally via other people, education, information, et cetera, how can I use those resources to pivot toward this new thing? And if we're talking about AI and folks who have AI anxiety, how can we use the resources that we have available to us to not be scared of it, but to learn how to use it and to partner with it so that it makes me better at my job? We're never gonna lose the human aspect in technology.
Yeah, and I think it's okay or, normal to have some fear about something new. That doesn't mean, that's debilitating, that we can't do it. So,
Yeah, exactly.
Tori, and what did you have for Dr. Franklin?
You mentioned that you dropped out of college to take care of your kids. Did you see yourself in this position that you are in today? And did you always knew that you wanted to go back?
Great question. That is a great question, Torianne, because you're taking me back in time. I love that. I'm a spiritual person. I believe in God. So I always knew that God has something greater for me in life. I always had a level of persistence and tenacity and resilience. And I knew that at some point I was going to get to the point that I felt like was for me, but I didn't know exactly what that was. The beginning of my so when I went back to school, I didn't quite know what I wanted to major in. My sister majored in accounting, and so I figured if my sister did it, I could do it. And she was my role model. We're first generation college students, and so she did it. She had a full ride. She graduated magna cum laude. I'm like, if Jackie can do it, I can do it because we were a lot alike. I majored in it, and once I finished, I was like, man, I don't know if I want to do this for the rest of my life, like counting the CPA and looking through balance sheets and stuff. And so I was already working, and so I was getting kind of more clarity on who I was as a person because the more you do, the more you learn about yourself, right? The more you travel, the more you meet new people, the more you take advantage of what's being offered to you at school. And you not only learn new things yourself, but your teachers and folks like Miss Allende, they pour into you and they also tell you what they see in you. You actually learn more about yourself. So that was happening. It had already happened to me some in high school. I had a really great teachers. I'm laughing because growing up in my mom's hometown, one of my science teachers was my great aunt. And then one of the bus drivers was my aunt. So, small town, that's how it works. And my grandma worked in the cafeteria. But the good thing about that is that we had fresh biscuits and stuff for lunch, but that's a whole other conversation because my grandmother could cook. But my point is that I was learning about myself as immersed myself in my studies, in my community, at church. And then when I entered the work world, I started learning more about myself there, both what I was experiencing, but then the feedback I was getting from other people. And that's kind of how I learned, what I wanted to do, more of what I wanted to do. I kind of, it's a process, right? You try some things out sometimes, it's a good fit, but then that word adaptability comes back up, right? So you learn something in that experience because I don't think anything is wasted. I don't think any experience is wasted. So you learn something in that experience about yourself, and then you use that to your advantage to pivot towards something else that works better for you. So that's what I did. I majored in accounting. I like, I really like it. And then my graduate degree, master's degree was in organizational leadership. And that's where I really learned, I really like figuring out how companies and organizations work. And I like leading people towards the success of those organizations. Does that make sense? I saw you nodding your head, so I think maybe it makes sense.
Yeah, it sounds like your community continued to be really foundational for you, and you started in with the numbers, but you're like, "Hey, I need the people. Where are the people?" So let's get back to that,
Yeah.
and let's continue to help the people around me grow like my community has done for me.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I will say my personality type is I am an introvert, but I'm a social introvert. So part of actually learning what you like is knowing who you are, right? And in any personality type, there is the stuff that we like to pop our collars about, right? Because introverts we like to brag that, we think before we speak, and most of our words are well thought out, right? And extroverts like to my wife is an expert actually. She's a communication expert, so that makes sense, right? But they like to, say, well, they always have something to talk about. But there's something for every personality type to work on, right? My work was to figure out how to get more of my thoughts out of my head into my speech to others. And then some of my wife's work has been to slow down a little bit and leave room for other folks to have something to say.
Okay, balancing each other out. But yeah, thank you for highlighting like kind of the joys of the scenic route as you named it instead of that linear path and all you can get out of that. So that's I think that's good for people to hear. In high school there can be a pressure, to choose one path and figure out your whole life. So how much you've accomplished is good to see on that scenic route as well. Sister Allende, we'll come over to you. Did you have a question?
Yes, so I heard you mention earlier that due to your father kind of navigating life with PTSD, as a result, your parents never married. And I wanted to know, as a child between the ages of 8 and 15, how did that reality shape your understanding of family? Like, do you believe that made you mature faster or see responsibility different? And how did that influence the kind of stability that you later sought to create in your own life with your own family?
Questions again. So I've always been very responsible, and I never really actually connected it with that period in my life. I just thought it was a part of my personality. But uh I forget what it's called, but it's a psychological scale, and it measures the effects of things that happen on you when you're happen to you when you're a child, and then later choices in life or whatever. Yeah, I will say that I've always been with my mom calls me the adventurous child, the independent child, and so it did mature me. My wife also says that her inner child is 8 and mine is 18. And so, yeah, it did affect me in terms of how I show up in the world. And quite honestly, I did not always like that. And I tried to adapt and be more like other people growing up. But what I had to realize was that there's value in every person and how they show up in the world. And that, my analytical self, as I used to be called, had lots of value. And this actually worked well for me. The other part of it is that it did because I married my first children's mom, later divorced and then remarried. And it did kind of structure my upbringing, kind of dictate how I structured my family. So for instance, very religious, um, kind of really traditional roles, and I had to actually morph and learn as an adult, or unlearn, I would say, a lot of things that, although they may not have been bad on their own, traversing through life, you're supposed to mature and grow. And when you partner with other folks, you have to try to mesh everyone's values into something that works for the whole family. So great questions. I would say a lot of the ideals I still keep, the spiritual ideals, spiritual disciplines, those have remained, and a lot of the religiosity has not.
Okay. Thank you for sharing so candidly and highlighting that growth is like almost equal parts unlearning as well as learning. So I think that's a good note for everybody. to be aware of. Eileen, what question did you have?
Dr. Franklin. So we go way back. And you did mention earlier that we both used to serve at a church, but what I got to see was you starting at our church and then serving and then growing into being one of the instructors teaching about leadership, about spiritual leadership. Can you share with our students and our listeners a little bit about, you named it adaptability, like going into an environment. What I've seen you do is you go into an environment and then you're already at the top. Can you share a little bit of some of your motivates you and holds you steady, and keeping that space in that environment, in new environments?
Yeah, so I will say I consider myself a lifelong learner. I'm just a curious person. So when I go into spaces, I want to know what's going on in there. In our African American tradition, we want to know who all over there, which means who all is in there, right? What are they doing in there? What's going on. And so for me, I am a natural observer. So even when I first came to the church that we were attending together, I sat back for a minute and learned what was going on, not only kind of so I could figure out if it was a place that I wanted to join, but also if it was a place I wanted to serve and be involved in. I look for opportunities. The music was just intuitive because that's what I do. The leadership opportunity, I think that came by way of, I can't remember how it came up, but it was natural. I was already doing it. And I co-led it with another of our friends, Kenya. And maybe she asked me because she knew that she knew about my career and what I was doing at work. And so we really tag team and taught that together for about several years. So I will say, to answer your question just concisely, um, I look for opportunities to be of service. When I did my master's degree, we had to do what was called a value statement. And, it was probably a 6-month long process. And we learned about leading other people. But what we learned first was that you have to be able to be grounded in what you believe and in your values. And you also have to do your own internal work before you can start telling other people what to do. And so we had to do a leadership assessment of ourselves and come up with our core values. And my primary core value, and this goes back to my upbringing, which I try to run away from, but it's ever present in my life, is to be of service to other people. And so I'm always looking for opportunities wherever I go to be of service, even at my current church now.
And I saw on your website you talked a little bit about finding your voice and commanding space without shouting. And I think that relates to everything you were just saying and is so important and doable. So
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Great question, Eileen. Thank you.
Terrell, we're coming over to you. What question did you have?
So, as a young leader who is in charge of 25 headaches, what are some advice or tips would you give me to be more efficient and impactful when leading others?
I would say you already are doing something that's very relevant to leading others, and that's actually asking questions. So, really being curious and looking for ways to improve yourself. I used to say this to my employees when I was at the Peace Corps, my last federal job. You can't really give your best if you aren't taking care of yourself first. And so, part of my job for them to be able to take care of themselves was to give them space to learn, to give them space to take care of their mental and physical health, time off, wellness, all of those things, and to make sure that they had the resources they needed to do their jobs well. Information, they had the budget, all of those things. I would say for you, you already are doing one of those major things and you're looking for information to be a better leader. Part of being a leader is the best leader, I would say, is knowing yourself well, right? And then the other one is figuring out how to lead people that aren't like you. It's so easy to lead people who are exactly like you. They have your same temperament. You seem like you are, I don't know, maybe it's just you on Zoom, but you seem like you pretty chill, pretty smooth. And so it's easy to lead people like us. Not so easy to lead people who aren't. And so I would say one of the things that you might want to start with is trying to figure out how to adapt your leadership style. There's that word again, adaptability, to lead people who don't show up in the world like you.
That's great advice. How does that make you feel, Terrell? What do you think about that piece there?
It like aligns aligns with what other people told me that I was like having this conversation about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that curiosity to find that connective tissue to be able
Yeah.
to connect with people so that they will be open to listening to you and following you. So, Terrell, do you want to tell Dr. Franklin why you're asking about that? Dr. Franklin, just so you know, Terrell's in the 11th grade and he's considering pursuing engineering.
Yeah, so last year, since my ninth grade, I am a part of the STEM Ambassador program. We make sustainable solutions to different problems around the world, most
Mhm.
in Africa. And last year, I like stepped up into a leadership role.
Yeah.
I wasn't like appointed a leader, like I just became a leader.
Mhm.
And now my team is responsible for making water filters, a prosthetic leg, and also this machine that turns plastic into filament. And filament is the thing that we use to 3D print with.
Yeah, Dr. Franklin, jump in
Wow.
and
Wow. No, I was just listening. I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Terrell, good grief. And you doing that in high school?
Yeah.
Yeesh.
And
What
he's
part of Africa?
humble to admit, but he has actually developed they're done with the Philibot and putting it together. They're wiring it now. And he's also been very successful at creating a new water filtration bottle that is pretty effective. So they're in the phase of doing the prosthesis,
Mm,
and that is the challenge because we went to Africa just the year before, and we were supposed to have a prosthesis for a
mm,
young lady in a remote village named Imagination, actually, is her name.
wow.
And she went rummaging through suitcases and there was no prosthesis to give her. So Terrell, now that the leaders that were in position have graduated, Terrell is now facing some challenges where he's starting pretty much at square one with redeveloping the prosthesis as opposed to building on the model that was already printed before and just like applying iterations. He has to start over again because those students, when they graduated, all high school life just erased from their minds and they forgot their passwords to get into the design scale. So for him, so now he's kind of starting over again and he has to lead the team to get this done before April 19th of this year.
Wow, wow, wow. Well, you know what? I mean, I wish you well, Terrell. And I think it sounds like you are just basically a leader. It's just in your blood, right? You stepped up on your own. And that's what leaders do. They see a problem and they step up to help fix it, even if they don't really have all the answers right away, because almost all the time, nobody does. Right? Nobody has all the answers. So let's be clear about that. But a lot of times, what happens with us as leaders is that we see something that we can help with and we step up and we build, they say we build the plane as we're flying it. Right. And that's what you're doing now, right? Trying to figure out how to resource and get these things done as you do the work. And so you already are building leadership skills just by stepping up and taking on these real complicated problems. And I've been to Africa, several countries, and God knows they need water filtration systems. So y'all are doing good work. I wanted to
yes.
clap while Ayinde was talking about your projects. I love it.
Yes.
Love it.
Props to you, Terrell, and thank you for sharing. And yes, you're already leading with care by coming here with that curiosity of how can I do better? How can I be better for my people? So we love to see that. Dr. Franklin, do you have any advice for him as he steps into, starting to consider college and pursuing this engineering career? He's getting some very practical
Yeah.
experience now, but anything that you can share with him, I'm sure he'd be happy to hear.
Yeah, I would say, I mentioned this earlier. I don't know if it was to you or to your sister, but tap into your resources that you have available to you. You have your resources. You have Mr. Yende here, Sister Yende. You have the other leaders and administrators at your school. You have folks in your community. I don't know if you're a part of a faith-based community or spiritual community, but there are people all over the place who are just waiting to help other folks reach their highest potential. And so I would say tap into your resources. I would say lean into, how can I say this? Be okay with being uncomfortable, right? So when something feels uncomfortable, it doesn't mean, and I'm not talking about, when you hurt yourself and you need to go to the doctor or anything illegal or unethical. You should always feel uncomfortable with those things, but you should never be uncomfortable with discomfort that leads to growth. There is no growth without discomfort. So I hear you asking the questions about leadership, and I sense maybe I don't know about all this leadership stuff. Maybe you just want to do your projects, but now you got to deal with these people. I get it. Trust me. Discomfort, right? But growth happens in discomfort. Just like when you go to the gym, right? You're lifting weights. You can't build muscles without actually discomfort of strength training and then your muscle fibers breaking down as a result of lifting weights and then rebuilding that soreness that comes and then rebuilding, right? And so I would say lean into discomfort. I would say to your sister as well, Torianne, if you're moving into other areas, and you'll probably get to Torianne in a minute, Vanessa, but the same goes for you. Always be okay with discomfort, because that's where the growth happens.
That's great advice. Terrell, did you have a final question for Dr. Franklin? Well, he shared some great advice with you on leadership and stepping into your career.
Yeah, how do you deal with a person that like doesn't want to be led?
That You're coming up with some great questions. You're coming up with better questions than some adults I have sessions with come up with. I would say you always want to figure out the why behind the what. So if I had this person, I was trying to lead them, I would want to get closer to them, have a conversation so that I understand them better. There's a saying that goes like this: understand the person's story and then understand the person better. Sometimes I've dealt with leading people. My last job, I had like 200 folks that reported up to me in different ways. And what I had to learn was I had to figure out my approach with different people. But part of that was learning the person, right? I didn't know, for instance, sometimes people would come to work, and this is just an example, and they would be off that day. After talking with them, sometimes I would learn that something happened in their family or something happened in their history, and something triggered it, right? Because people don't leave their humanity behind when they come to school. They don't leave their humanity behind when they come to work, come to church. When I show up, all of my stuff shows up with me, good and the bad. And so I would say, if there's an opportunity, try to learn more about the person and then learn probably a better approach. There's probably a reason why they don't want to be led.
All right, Terrell. So yeah, here your work begins. Take that time for that one-on-one, build that trust, and then create that path ahead. So we know you can do it. And thank you for
Yes.
asking that question. Tori Ann, they are twins. Tori Ann also in the 11th grade and is pursuing psychology. She wants to be a counselor. So Tori Ann, do you want to tell Dr. Franklin a little bit more about that, and he can share some advice?
I want to become a psychologist because growing up, I always be that friend that like listen like everybody's problem and then learning and then giving them advice on it. And they be like, I would like they would come back to me and be like, oh, your advice really worked. And then like growing up with my dad and stuff, when I be having like breakdowns and stuff, he be like, okay, you need to like he just come up with like solutions on the spot. Like it's no reason for you to get upset. It's no reason because it's already happened. There's nothing you can do about it. So that's like one of the reasons why I want to become like a psychologist, like learn about people and like giving them like a personal insight of how the same insight that I got growing up, just like being able to like retain that information to someone else. And I just like have a passion for it.
Yeah, I love that, Torianne. Thank you for sharing that. Actually, before our session, I was at the gym, and I'm kind of a little bit of a nerd. I was listening to a podcast by three psychologists. One of them I admire very much. I don't know if you've heard of Jamal Bryant. He's a pastor. He used to be in Baltimore, Maryland. Now he's in Georgia. Well, his sister, her name is Dr. Tama Bryant. They're African American. They lived in Liberia for several years, but raised in Baltimore, Maryland. She is phenomenal. And when you started talking, I started thinking about her and listening to her, and how she loves her job. And part of the reason why she became a psychologist was because of the same thing happened to her. The same thing happened to her as happened to you. Everybody used to come to her for advice, and she used to be coaching everybody. Since her dad was a pastor too, what would happen a lot of times in the African American church tradition, a lot of people will call their pastor before they call their psychologist or the clinician. So a lot of people will call her house first. She would start getting those calls and they would start telling her everything before they could get to her dad. So she didn't even know, just like you, she was being trained to be what she was meant to be. So I love that you are paying attention to that, right? And you're paying attention to what you have a passion for, what actually comes natural to you. And, if you have a chance, look her up. She's phenomenal. I mean, I'm a dude, a man, but I listen to her because she helps me out. And it doesn't even matter where you get information, who you get it from as long as it works for you. So yeah, I'm so proud of you. And I can tell just by the passion that came out when you were talking about what you want to do, um, that you really care about this. And that's the first thing that we always want to look for in our students. So when you get to college, are you passionate about this subject? Because it's just easier to work with students who care about what they're learning than students who don't. So you're going to do well. Gonna
All
do-
right. Thank you so much. Yeah. So if you want to share one piece of advice going into this life of service or pursuing, the next 10 years in education, and then we're wrapping up in our final couple minutes here. So,
Yeah, I would say I have several friends who um, I mean, it's just been really phenomenal. I finished my doctorate about 3 years ago, and I did it while I was working. It was during the pandemic. My kids were here. They were in high school. It was a hot mess, but I finished, and they finished, and all of uh, I finished pretty well, thanks be. And what happened after that is that it inspired some of my other friends to go back and get their doctorate. So I have one of my best friends who's in school now, and my wife just started her program last fall, right? What I tell them all is not how you start, is how you finish, right? I know so many smart people who started college and never finished, both their undergraduate, their master's degree, or even their doctorate, right? And what I tell people is it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. I ran marathons. I've done about 4 marathons. It's 26.2 miles. Point two, don't leave out the point two because guess what? The point two is the hardest part of a marathon, right? And so I would say start off strong, but also finish strong. Always finish where you start and find the resources to help you get through. You have resources, your parents, you have your community. You probably can reach back high school, have Sister Ayinde and other folks cheering you on, but always finish strong.
all right. Thank you so much. Everything you shared with us today was so rooted and inspirational, but practical. So thank you. I'm sure this will stick with Tori Ann and Terrell, but let's hear from them. Tori Ann, what'd you pick up from Dr. Franklin today?
What I picked up from Dr. Franklin is that it's always good to be curious and observant about your surroundings. And also, if in leadership skills, just learning how to be a leader. Don't get frustrated if you're trying to lead somebody and they're not really following like your instructions. You gotta know the person first and figure out like what the issue is before you get upset or angry.
Love it. She grabbed a lot from you there, sir. Terrell, what about you? What resonated with you today?
What resonated was how I can become like a better leader and also like the different like leadership styles. I ain't really thought about that and how people lead differently and also how to like improve like my social skills, how to like deal with certain type of people and stuff like that.
Awesome, awesome. Well, great starting place to continue to learn and grow, Terrell. We're excited to be here for it and continue to provide people who can give you great advice on getting there. Thank you so much, Dr. Franklin, for your time. It was an honor to hear all your wisdom. What's that website for your consulting company?
Yeah, it's drdarrengfranklin.com.
All
Uh,
right.
yeah.
Thanks so much for listening to Access Co-Leaders. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thank y'all. Take care.